Our speakers for this afternoon are Dr. Pravir Dey, Professor Research and Information System for Developing Countries, New Delhi, and Coordinator of ASEAN India Center. Dr. Siddharth Roy is the Economic Advisor to the Tata Group. Dr. Rupa Chandra is RBI Chair Professor in Economics in the Economics and Social Sciences Department at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. And Mr. Akshay Mathur, who is the Director of Research and a Fellow of Geo-Economic Studies at the Gateway House in Mumbai. Please. First ever World Trade Maharashtra on the theme Enhancing Exporter Competitiveness of the State. The first in series is being held in Mumbai on the topic Regional Trading Blocks and the Emerging Trading System. This will be followed by a series of events to be held at key cities across Maharashtra on a specific topic of relevance to the regional growth. So please join us in the various cities if you can. I now request Ms. Nayak to kindly deliver the welcome address.
Ladies and gentlemen, before I deliver the welcome address, I would request Mr. Varadkar to please felicitate our guests today. Mr. Varadkar, will you please felicitate Ms. Dr. Rupa Chandra? Flowers. May I request Mr. Varadkar to please felicitate Dr. Siddharth Roy? Dr. Pravir Dey? And Mr. Akshay Mathur. I'm sorry to have taken this away from Tripti because this was supposed to come after the welcome, but I believe in felicitating our guests right before our welcome address. So welcome all of you to this first World Trade Day Maharashtra, which is being organized in India for the very first time with a view to create an awareness of international trade and how international trade across the world is being recognized as a very important sector for development. Most of Indian SMEs are quite happy with the domestic market, but we from World Trade Center feel that it is time that they look at markets outside India and try to at least make an entry in different markets so that they will also be able to bring regional growth. We have stalwarts with us today, experts. I don't want to come between you and the discussion. So I would like to say briefly that we're doing this, as Tripti told you already, in 5 different regions: Nagpur, Nashik, Aurangabad, Pune, and in Kolhapur. Each district, each of these key regions, we've chosen topics which are very, very pertinent to that region. In Kolhapur, it is going to be on the engineering sector. In Aurangabad, on the auto component sector. In Nashik, it is on how exports can be developed through what is it that SMEs need to learn through documentation. In Pune, it is a similar topic, regional trading blocks. And I hope with this initiative, in the next 5 years, we touch a higher figure than what we are today at 1.94%.
So we shall now proceed with a panel discussion on regional trading blocks and the emerging trading system. The session will be moderated, as Ms. Nayak said, by Mr. Akshay Mathur of the Gateway House. Mr. Mathur, the floor is all yours.
Just to set the context, the reason why a discussion on trade is particularly important today is because there are 3 or 4 very important trends that are taking place in the world. And I'm going to stop it after just explaining and mentioning the trends to you because I want to quiz some of these experts on how to understand and how to address and respond to those trends. One of the first trends that's taking place is the changing nature of trade with the inclusion of services. Lots of services that were never tradable before, like education and healthcare and retail, have now become tradable because you can do that online. E-commerce of services is also picking up. The second is there is a fragmentation of the trading system that is taking place. Some of you are aware that the Trans-Pacific policy is the one that really shook the world. But there's also RCEP, which is the ASEAN countries, along with some of the Asian countries, which was a response to the transatlantic and the trans-Pacific treaties that were taking place. So the second big trend is this fragmentation. The third trend is there is a interweaving of trade with investment, which is very hard to segregate now. It's almost conjoined. And the world is finding it really difficult, especially when it comes to international negotiation, how these two should be separated or how these should be jointly negotiated in the international arena. And the fourth one, which we in India know very well, is the sensitivity to global trade imbalances. Because we have a huge trade deficit, we know what impact it has on current account deficit, and we know all the policies and efforts that our government puts together to increase our exports and how difficult that is. But increasingly there is sensitivity that this can no longer continue, that there has to be another model of international relations that should be in place where the exchange of goods and services can be done in a manner which is more fair, more equitable, and reaches the masses more quickly. The people on the panel here today can actually address some of these things. Rupa, who is from IIM Bangalore, has done a lot of work on trade and services. In fact, she is one of the authors, if I can say, of the trade and services proposal that India has put to the WTO. So we're very happy to have her here. And of course, she has a history of work on trade. I was just asking her before this panel started that the seminal book on trade and services was done by her in 2002, and why hasn't there been an update on that? So I think you all should demand that of her after this panel is over. We also have Mr. Siddharth Roy, who actually, people in Bombay know you well, because we've had a chance to interact with you. And he's had a chance to give an industry perspective and also contribute an industry perspective to various government committees and forums and into the national discourse on what trade means and what it means for industry. So we look forward to that perspective. And of course, third on my left here is Dr. Prabir Dey with Research and Information Systems, a think tank which is affiliated with the Ministry of External Affairs, but an autonomous think tank. And the institution itself has a history of looking at development cooperation and trade, especially regional trade. But I think maybe Prabir may be one of those few people who have done the work on the basis of which people like us do further analysis. So he's done the seminal work on actually looking at the different barriers to trade at 6-digit levels, 10-digit levels also. If ever there was to be an opportunity, he would do it. He'd be the first person you would know. So I think in terms of regional trade, especially with respect to Southeast Asia, he's definitely the expert here. So having explained to you why you're really lucky to have everybody and put enough pressure on the panel here to live up to those expectations, what we will do is we will let everybody here give opening remarks for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then I will ask a few questions, and then we will open it up to the audience. So may I request Rupa for you to start?
How India is positioned within this changing landscape, and how broadly India needs to strategize in terms of its orientation towards the multilateral as well as the regional and other forums. So as we all know very well, the multilateral trading system is based on several guiding principles. So, the issues of transparency, non-discrimination among members, giving flexibilities to developing countries, providing forums for dialogue, for consensus building, and so on. But by and large, you could say that the last round, at least, of WTO negotiations, the Doha Development Round, which commenced in 2001, has been a failure round. It's just been too long, and business can't wait. There are just too many members with too many different sensitivities and interests, and the range of issues has become more and more complex over time. Perhaps the only real concrete deliverable from this round is the trade facilitation agreement, which has been ratified. Other than that, of course, important issues have been discussed, like food security, rural livelihoods, MSMEs, non-tariff barriers, etc. But consensus has not been reached. It's been difficult. Now, in the face of all of this, of course, we're seeing a variety of challenges to the system. First and foremost is the fact that as tariffs have come down, other sorts of measures are on the rise, increasingly more and more opaque, difficult to also measure, and difficult to govern, because a lot of them ride on national sovereignty. I mean, you can't really dictate to countries that they shouldn't have their own national standards or private standards. So the rise of standards is one issue which I think the growing role and incidence of regulatory barriers is one challenge that the system is facing, and it really doesn't know how to grapple with it without undermining the sovereignty of nations. So regulatory convergence, harmonization, this is one thrust which is coming, and it's also creeping into the free trade agreements. The second issue is, of course, something we'll have to deal with, which is demographic and technological challenges, which are going to shape the pattern of trade flows and the comparative advantage of nations. So that's something, which will take its own course. But the third set of challenges, which Akshay also talked about briefly, is that there's a growing interface with a variety of other areas, not just investment, but government procurement, competition policy, IPRs, and then the growing role of other forms of trade, so services trade, the role of e-commerce. So we're grappling with new sorts of issues and new ways in which, like for instance, data protection, data privacy, how to develop multilateral frameworks and again not get into undermining of sovereignty of nations. How do we come to some common platforms on these issues? So these are going to be challenges. Now, one very critical area which is relevant to today's discussion is the proliferation of free trade agreements. And, depending on what numbers you take, I have some recent estimates. If you were to just take agreements which are in accession stage, notified agreements to the WTO, non-notified, and so on, all hues and colors of agreements, there are actually around 800 plus such agreements, of which around 360 are in Asia alone. The bulk of them, actually, the trend is interesting. The bulk are intra-regional, but a large number of these are within Asia and they are within South-South, so between developing countries. Apart from that is, of course, the fact that these agreements are no longer just agreements in goods. They are also getting into all these complex areas of government procurement, investment, competition policy, environment, labor, R&D, cooperation chapters, all sorts. So yes, there are of all sorts. Acting funny. They are of all sorts. Some are shallow agreements, some are very deep, and so on. But there's this constant thrust, as I said, towards regulatory harmonization and convergence across countries, which may have very, very different sorts of regulatory and institutional capacity. So this is going to be a major, major issue going ahead for businesses who want to deliver around the world. The other important issue is that you have the formation of mega regional trading blocs, right? And I'm sure Prabir will talk at length about it. But then, just to mention the main ones, you have the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is the countries on both sides of the Pacific. Of course, in a bit of a doldrum now, thanks to Trump. Then you have, of course, the Transatlantic Investment Partnership, US and the EU, again, given problems on both sides. We'll have to see. So everything's kind of stalled. And then RCEP, of course, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership here, which is ASEAN plus 6. These are all agreements which are really going beyond trade in a sense. There's a strategic motivation. Some are about regulatory convergence like TPP. Some are, really trying to promote US interests in Asia. So there are all sorts of reasons why these agreements are being formed, but the challenges, as I said, for businesses are going to be many. So how is India placed within this? We know that India has always been very focused on multilateral negotiations, a very proactive sort of player, though often criticized for being very defensive. But at the same time, India, I think, has realized it can't be left behind. It has joined the bandwagon. And increasingly, it's gone beyond, signing bilaterals with LDCs or countries in the region towards developed countries. So now we have this Look East policy, but we also have an ongoing sort of negotiation. Again, I would say in not great shape with the EU. Then, of course, proposed agreements, Canada, Russia, etc., Australia, I think many of them in negotiations, different stages. What is quite evident that India is willing to go a little further in its bilaterals. Its agreements, at least if you look at India, Japan, India, Korea, some of these comprehensive sort of partnership or cooperation agreements, the commitments go further, including in services. Though India has, I would say, a mix of shallow and deep agreements, but overall, they are WTO plus. So that's one signal that India is willing to kind of strategize further in these bilateral arrangements and maybe put aside some of its defensive interests. Now, there's been a lot of criticism about how India has gone about its agreements, whether it's really gained, have its partners gained more at the expense of India, etc. I'll talk about that later. But what are the primary interests, I think, and this I believe should be the focus, which is to attract investments. I think investments have to play a key role. Of course, that doesn't happen just because you sign an agreement and have an investment chapter in an agreement that investment will start flowing. Ultimately, whether it's domestic investment or foreign investment, it will depend upon the business environment. So a lot of what is going on today in terms of improving judicial efficiency or trying to make it easier to sort of focus that is there should play an important role eventually in making India more attractive for investments. The other important strategic interest for India in these FTAs is services. Because there's always been this standard thing that India is not as competitive, say, in manufacturing, it might get more of a trade deficit, but this will get compensated through services where we, at least at the national level, we have a surplus. So in its agreements as well, it will be able to do better, it will be able to penetrate these markets in the IT and BPO services, professional business services, and leverage its demographic advantage. Have we really gained much in that context? Again, I'll talk about that later because I think we've been a little bit too hasty in thinking that FTAs are going to deliver a lot, because in some of these areas, just like with investment, where the domestic reforms and the regulatory part is very important, in services too, penetration of other markets is not so easy. And I think we hadn't realized that. And you could also say maybe we haven't negotiated very wisely either. Okay, I'll come back to these points later. So overall, given this sort of evolving landscape, what should India's approach be? Well, we can't walk away from either multilateralism or bilateralism or regionalism. I think India needs to be perceived as a less defensive country in multilateral negotiations. The fact that it has ratified the TFA and so on, I think puts it there. India's recent proactiveness in issues such as the trade facilitation and services or the e-commerce discussions, I think this is the sort of approach we need. We need to put agendas there. Otherwise, the multilateral discussions are kind of just stalling and other things are just taking their course and India will get left behind. So we have to keep on being a sort of proactive player in international negotiations. On the regional side, now let me first discuss briefly that there are both negative and positive implications of what's going on. In terms of these large mega blocks and so on, to the extent that India is not a member of some of them, and there are enough studies also out there, there is going to be some investment and trade diversion. There is going to be more of a compliance burden on India because some of the regulatory sort of compliance issues which are coming up in these, eventually, businesses can't fragment their approach across markets, so they'll also have to upgrade their standards. But again, glass is half empty or half full, so you look at it the other way, that in a sense it will also force some of this development of institutional and regulatory capacity, upgrading of standards, skill sets, etc. So, and to the extent that many of the members that India has bilaterals with are also members of these regional blocs, there will be some sort of some gradual harmonization, which is good for India, I feel. Also, to the extent India can put in place some of the domestic reforms and improve manufacturing competitiveness, these are opportunities for India to enter into some of these production networks. So we have to really strategize in that manner. So overall, as I said, India will have to be a proactive player in multilateral negotiations and be much more strategic to leverage its FTAs and regionals, etc. It has not done so far, but I think the time has come and many of the domestic measures we have today will hopefully help in that regard. I'll just stop here because I'm sure many other issues will come up.
Thank you, Rupa. I'm going to actually move to the left first and ask Prabir to give his opening remarks.
But when we look at in Delhi, we think about always the trade is a very nationalist point of view, but it is, we have come to the state level. That's actually the reality. I mean, we don't get that sort of feedback or some impressions always in Delhi. So I congratulate the World Trade Center as all working here to making it, and I came to know that you are spreading it to other parts of the Maharashtra as well. So you should also take it to other states, and I think that would be very good. Because states, and said before I come to my opening remarks, I found that while working with RIS, which is a think tank with the Ministry of External Affairs, the huge gap between the government thinking and the state thinking on international trade. This gap has appeared over time because through constitution, because trade belongs to settled subject. So this trade is settled subject. So states know where it comes in, but thing has changed. States have to be more proactive on the international trade from the foreign policy, and this kind of things should happen more and more. Not just in the Maharashtra, also in Delhi and other important parts. Gateway House, WTC has a very important role to play. Now, coming to the discussion, what Professor Chanda said, I will take it slightly in a different view. Multilateral development, she has explained quite well. Now, when it comes to the regional dimensions, it's basically the government has always been playing a kind of a strategic role. Sort of a domino effect. If you are not part of any regional club, then you are left out. So it is, if you look at the 60s, 70s and 80s and early 90s, India is always champion of the multilateral process. It's a founder member of WTO, GATT, all sorts of global, development. But regional trading, regional clubs like, whatever you call it, we call it a club theory. So India has never been a very active member. But what we found that India's neighbors, which are picking up one after another, I don't want to take the name of that neighbor or some of the neighbors. So if you don't join in the regional clubs from the strategic point of view, the political point of view, you are left out. Why this happened? Because the multilateral trade process is actually not giving you the kind of full welfare to the country who are part of the members. Many of the times, if you are a big, large country, you play a big role. But if you are a small economy, if you are a middle-level economy, you always be kind of a silent bystander. You don't have much stronger role to play. So you see this proliferation of RTAs, what Professor Chanda said, 600 is a cumulative number. Active will be those who have notified WTO and doing trading arrangements, maybe 360 or something around. And India, from no champion, it has become a big champion of the joining in the RTAs. And not at the current government, because we have taken a separate view that we are not going to sign any regional trading arrangements. Whatever we have done, we would like to consolidate and would like to revisit if required. For example, with ASEAN or in SAARC, and government has taken slightly a strategic view in terms of promoting regional trading arrangements. Present government looks at the regional trading arrangements sometimes too much problem. Like in South Asia, you know that India, Pakistan cannot sit together. So government of India spending a huge amount of energy, resources to SAFTA and moved into now to the BIMSTEC. We have BIMSTEC arrangement which is linking South and Southeast Asia. And leaving aside Pakistan, we are doing several sub-regional. So ultimately, if you do lots of clubs like sub-regional one, regional one, you overlap and you lose resources. And that has been happening. For example, the BBI, and you might have heard this nomenclatures and the words and acronyms. It's Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal. They signed motor vehicle agreement. Bhutan Parliament didn't ratify. So we are now thinking to go back to each country to renew the motor vehicle agreement. So it's not so easy to form any club either. But once you give energies to resources and it doesn't take a sec, then the frustration comes. So South Asia, which is from 1995, we looked at very, very actively. and it moved into a free trade in 2006 with the free trade agreement with SAFTA. But in South, these clubs are also having several exclusion lists. Because if you form the regional blocks, then you start discriminating other members joining. So you always create an issue for non-members. And within the members, you have several exclusion lists. In South Asia, for example, the SAFTA, the LDC members, they have a huge number of negative lists, sensitive lists. And I have the statistics, I didn't prepare for presentation here, the PowerPoint, that most of the goods which LDC they depend on us, the trade has gone up. Then what is the point of keeping those in the sensitive list, negative list? Reason was that to protect the industry, infant industry argument. So we sign agreement, but we don't follow up. Even if we sign agreement, we don't revisit after some times. So these are the issues we face when we look at South Asia. Now, if the political burdens sometimes, take over your whole commerce and economics, that happened in SAFTA. We are moving with BIMSTEC, and BIMSTEC, we signed 2004 the free trade agreement. Never implemented so far. Still negotiation going on. We have an ASEAN with the East. India has an Act East policy. Several bilateral agreements. Sometimes even business people for whom we create these agreements, they even don't know where the India has signed agreement or which member countries they belong. They have signed the FTAs. So FTAs are basically creating a pathways for the private sector to get the benefits in terms of trade and investments. And Akshay said rightly, trade and investment we cannot see separately. Trade means goods, services, and plus investment. So if you look at the three, India is also signed sort of a comprehensive arrangement with Japan, with Korea, with ASEAN, with Malaysia, some are under negotiations. But frankly speaking, if I pick up ASEAN, which I am in the ASEAN chair at RIS, we had actually lost 4 years in terms of FTA. We signed FTA in 2010. We took 6 years to negotiate. By the time we implement, negotiated, schedule got lost. Automobile industries, they don't need any gearbox to be imported from any Indonesia because we could produce the gearboxes in Pune or in Gurgaon or somewhere in goods. So these things, we took a lot of time to negotiations, and then when we implement it, and then, we lost some of its relevance. As a matter of fact, 2015, our leaders look at India-ASEAN trade to reach 100 billion. If you see the literature and the speeches of the ministers and secretaries, you will see. Now, we had trade in 2015 about 66 billion, and 2016 we come back to 70. Anyway, worldwide trade is not doing well. But what I mean, that we have sometimes too much regional trading arrangements. Sometimes we have RTAs, but we don't go, line by line. We don't implement. We don't do our work. We just sign the deal, come back. So, bottom line is that we create road to come in for the trade. We have FTAs, but we don't know how much we need to take these RTAs for creation of a value chains, which China did fantastically with ASEAN countries and with other neighbors. So here, we have an FTA, we don't have a value chains. We have a FTA in services, for example, Singapore, till now, how many mutual recognition agreements we signed with Singapore? If you have a master's degree in law, or if you have a PhD from University of Mumbai, if you apply for a job in National University of Singapore, no, you won't be treated as part. Whereas, as per the agreement, they have to look at in parity. So those works we don't do, and I don't give blame to anyone, but it comes actually the government has a very strong role to play. But government has only 5-6 people, one section officer, one assistant secretary, one deputy secretary, and joint secretary. That ends. So 4 or 5 people a supply line for the government to negotiate in a trade agreement may be enough, but to implement we don't have very much adequate resources. So what's come ultimately that we lose out, like with ASEAN we had a trade surplus. I mean, I'm coming up slightly as an economist, more as a political commentator. We have a surplus we converted into a deficit. Maybe sometime it will have a surplus again. But the process from surplus to deficit is quite long, and in the meantime, we lose a lot of things in the process. So I think this is in briefly my opening remarks.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Siddharth now to give his opening remarks.
Good evening. Now, coming back to free trade arrangements, there has been a lot of discussion on free trade arrangements in recent years. Most of them point out, so far as India is concerned, we have not really gained much from these free trade arrangements. If you look at the pre and post situation of the FTAs that we have signed, in most of the cases, our trade deficit with the countries have actually gone up. If you take ASEAN, Japan and Korea together, only last year, we had a deficit of about $30 billion. With ASEAN alone, if I am not mistaken, it was around 14.8 or so deficit. Now, the key issue is, if you have a deficit, should we be worried about it, concerned about it, and when you sign the agreement next time or renegotiate this agreement, should there be certain clauses that you should include? But that's something I will get into later. Even from the point of view of utilization of the FTA, the utilization rate has been quite low. The Indian utilization rate is around 27%. But our only competitor in this field is China. China's utilization rate is around 23%. So it's not that we are using also the FTAs in a major way. The only FTAs where we have been quite successful are the FTAs with LDCs and SAFTA, where we have a trade surplus, and in fact it has gone up by 3.16% per times in last 8 or 10 years. 10 years. Now, if you look at the kind of countries with which we have really had a good trade surplus, are countries like Nepal, Afghanistan, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. Now, given this level of achievement, it tells you certain thing about your industry. Now, the question that comes up, if you are successful, maybe, I'm not getting into the negative aspects of it, but suppose this is where your strength lies. Why aren't we looking at other LDCs with which we can possibly have a similar kind of an agreement, possibly in Africa? We have had some discussions with SACO. Well, I think SDAC also, we had some discussions. Yeah. But over there, we had a customs union or preferential trade arrangement. We have not really gone in for an FTA over there. So that's again something which we need to possibly pursue. Now, coming back to what is happening in your regional trade arrangements, we have looked at RCEP and APEC largely as defensive strategies because we were not included in TPP, and of course TTIP was between US and Europe, so there was no question of including us over there. Okay. Now, both these TPP and TTIP have for the time being, it has got eclipsed. So this gives us an opportunity to improve our competitiveness, to improve our manufacturing sector, accept the standards or the higher standards that some of these trade agreements are talking about, and I think Professor Chanda also talked about it. Now, when it comes to acceptance of these high standards, there has always been some kind of a resistance from the policymakers' side. But I want to point out one thing. Suppose you are in the private sector and you are supplying to a company like Walmart or Target, and they want a certain standard. You have to either follow that standard or you are out of business. So the question is, at some stage or the other, if the world demands a particular standard in sanitary and phytosanitary terms, in terms of labeling, in terms of even in services, in terms of data security, you will have to go for it. So what is really important for us, since we have some time now or some breathing space, is to improve our standards and bring it in line with the best in the world. The second thing is, when it comes to issues like improving domestic improving competitiveness, we need to look at the domestic economy. The cost of money is high, which needs to be brought down. The logistic costs are high, because in many of the items, the logistics cost can go up to even 5 to 7% of the turnover. So that needs to be brought down. The infrastructure cost needs to be brought down, which includes power cost. So once these things happen, and once we start innovating in the manufacturing sector, or we get technology from outside so that we can have some kind of dissemination of technology across industries, then and only then we can think of becoming more competitive. If we get into RCEP today, and China is a member of RCEP, what are the things we are exporting to China? We export cotton, we export iron ore, we export some mineral oils, and the fourth largest item of export is human hair. So, if we are not into of course, we could have loved to export pharmaceuticals, generic pharmaceutical items. The real problem is the Chinese hospitals are not prescribing Indian pharmaceutical items. So there we have some problems in many of these areas. So the real issue is, unless we improve our competitiveness and competitiveness of both manufacturing and services, there are going to be serious problems. So it doesn't matter which trading bloc we join, which club we join. In any case, our ability to negotiate with these clubs have also not been great. If you really look at the Indo-Thai agreement or the Indo-ASEAN agreement, the rates which we have got in many of our items are higher than the rates which they are giving to, because they have similar arrangements with China, with Korea and Japan, ASEAN for example, the rates which they have got. So that is of course another issue which will come up when we have renegotiations of some of these arrangements. Now, not only we should look at the manufacturing sector, maybe we should also try to broaden our perspective and bring in services. Once we bring in services, one of the key issues is that services and investment cannot be isolated. You look at the success of Indian IT companies in Japan. In most of the cases, they have a joint venture. In our own group has a joint venture over there, so has Wipro, so has Infosys, they have a joint venture. And this joint venture has given them the ability to understand Japanese culture, to understand the language and break into the Japanese market. Now, the question is, when you have a joint venture in your segment, then obviously you will have to invest certain things over there. And once you are investing, the role of investment within SIPA becomes quite important. Now, the other thing in SIPA is that there was some talk about education, health, etc. some time back. Now, you look at the way we can take advantage, or where we have to face this. Suppose a lawyer wants to go and practice in Japan today. Okay. Now, this is allowed within SIPA. For that, he has to be a Bengoshi. To become a Bengoshi, he has to spend 5 years. And before he becomes a Bengoshi, he has to learn the Japanese language. So he has to spend another 5 years. So the total 10 years of effort will go in becoming a lawyer. So you can put it in the treaty, but it's very difficult to implement. So we have to be a little alert to some of the things which we include in the SIPA. Similarly, in the field of healthcare, will the insurance company recognize the qualifications and pay for it? Of course, in insurance, we are talking about insurance. One Indian insurance company has a presence in Japan for a long time, that is New India Assurance. It has been present there since 50s, which is possibly not widely known. So in insurance again, we have to see the standards over there and the standards here match, otherwise there will be an issue. Now coming back to investment per se, one of the key things is that investment will also lead to investment will also need many a times it will help in sort of procuring critical inputs from the countries with which you have a tie-up. Secondly, it will also help you in the second round when investment has been made in a country like India by Japan or Korea and they have produced certain things, and in the second round you are sort of exporting out of the country. So basically what we are saying that in the first round you may see that you have a negative trade balance. In the second round you may feel that because of the investments, because of the tie-ups in manufacturing and services, you have a lot more opportunities that you visualized initially. So what we need to look at is what is going to be the future architecture and draw up our trade agreements more adroitly. Thank you.
Away and hope that you can give the answers briefly so we can get questions in. But before I do that, and also partly to just challenge everybody here and get a sense, how many people in this room have read or know about the trade facilitation agreement and services that India has submitted? Can you please raise your hand so we can get an idea? The TFA and services? Okay, only 2, 1.5. Okay, 1.5. Oh, that one is also gone. Okay, 0.5. Okay, I think this is why this conversation is so important and why the WTC wanted to do this and make this so important. I think what I'd like to do, Rupa, as you've seen by the show of hands yourself, Rupa, first of all, I think I'm going to have this question is going to be in 2 or 3 parts. So if you can be a little brief, but first question is, can you just place where trade and facilitation agreement is what we have said in the global trading negotiations on services? So the trade and negotiations on services have happened since GATS or even before. And so, but there are some, and then there is also something called as TISA, which is put together by developed countries, which is called Trade and Services Agreement. So with respect to GATS, TISA, FTA and services that India has with ASEAN and this TFA, can you just contextualize? Is this something new? Is this a combination? What is this TFA and services that government has submitted?
Yeah, so it's really heartrending to see so few people know about the trade facilitation agreement. So where is it placed? Actually, just to give a bit of a snapshot, services trade got introduced in the Uruguay round of negotiations, 1986 to 94. And if you broadly have a sense of the architecture of services, because services trade is harder to visualize compared to trade in goods. So you have 4 modes of supply. Mode 1, which is when the service is actually crossing borders, and the best example today would be something like data flows across borders. Your BPO IT enabled services would be that. Mode 2, which is consumption abroad, so the consumer is going abroad and consuming the service. So something like health tourism, as was mentioned. I thought, let me put the context, otherwise what I explain later won't make sense. Mode 3, which is where investment comes in, where you have to set up a commercial presence in order to deliver the service in another market. So it could be through JV or just a subsidiary or a wholly owned, whatever. And the 4th is temporary movement of service providers. So that's like your H1B sort of people who go and provide on-site services, or could be a teacher going somewhere and providing education services. So that's the thing. So obviously, as you can see, the nature of trade and services becomes very complex because you have 4 modalities through which you have to understand how services are flowing across borders, and a lot of the regulations which govern them then become not just border issues. You're not seeing a tariff or a quota per se. Quotas are there, like on movement of people, but a lot of domestic issues like qualification requirements and things come into the frame. Now, where is this placed? So what happened in the Uruguay round is basically nothing much was really committed on services. The whole architecture is such that countries have a lot of flexibility. They can pick and choose sectors to schedule, and the type of commitments they make can be very shallow, hardly anything. In some cases, partial commitments. So they go by modes and they go by sectors and subsectors, etc. So essentially what happened is you got very, very sort of lowest common denominator sort of commitments. Very open sort of services like tourism, etc. got more commitments. Things like health, education, etc. where there are more sort of concerns and sensitivities, you got very little commitment. So that's the context. Now there was a mandate that there would be discussions on services continuing post 2000. Now that was happening anyway, but they weren't really moving, and of course all this became part of the Doha development round as well, and there are proposals there for specific addressing the developing countries' needs and so on, addressing specific issues of interest like mobility of people and so on, service providers. But alongside, a plurilateral sort of agreement also emerged, which is the Trade and Services Agreement. India is not party to that. Brazil is not party to that. It has mainly developed countries, but a bunch of developing countries as well, like Pakistan is a member of the TISA. So the idea there was that somehow we'll get a critical mass of countries who will push the services negotiations. Of course, India being such a strong sort of proponent of services in recent years and not being part of TISA raised a lot of attention and criticism why India was not prepared. TISA had its own issues in terms of whatever unilaterally you do, that automatically has to become a sort of binding commitment, etc. And India was not happy with some of those features. Now, what has happened is that because TISA was going on, India was not part of it. The general GATS 2000 sort of negotiations on services were going on, not much was being delivered. Some of the key areas of interest for India in services were basically 2. One is mobility of service providers, given the interests of the IT sector, and today it's extremely relevant. Also mode 1, which is the cross-border delivery because of the IT-enabled services and online sort of delivery and so on. So these were the 2 main. I would say in recent years, even mode 3 has become relevant because India does see an opportunity, for instance, in terms of exporting FDI. So like IT is a classic example of that. And in fact, if you look at the sort of protectionist challenges we are facing, mode 3 exports have to play a bigger role in the way the IT firms have their business models. Anyway, so I think this proposal for a trade facilitation agreement in services came post the ratification of the TFA in goods. It comes out of the fact that India is not a member of this plurilateral group that was negotiating TISA. It comes out of the fact that in areas of interest we haven't really got much in the GATS negotiations and in the Doha round. And therefore there was a need to sort of give a momentum in issues where somehow developing countries and LDCs are getting left out, which is so the idea here is that there are a lot of elements in the trade facilitation agreement in goods which are also relevant in the case of services. If you look at broad principles in the agreement for the TFA in goods, Okay, we're talking about transparency, providing, publishing, relevant information, having it available in a timely manner. Any changes in policies, etc., they should be opaque. They should be provided. Things should be done through a single window sort of system. You should try to do things electronically, right? So many of these sorts of regulatory cooperation, transparency, predictability, those principles are also relevant in the case of services, and I would say, in fact, more relevant. So I'll just give an example. If you want to send a service provider to another country to service a client, but you don't really know when you file for the visa how long it's going to take, how they're going to look at his qualifications, look at his prior work experience and see whether it's equivalent or not to what someone would have required there, how they're going to assess the documentation, the certification requirements, all of these things. So there is a lot of uncertainty, there are a lot of procedural bottlenecks. There are visa fee hikes, there are changes, discretionary sort of changes, and they might not be informed. So all these sorts of things have a bearing on your ability to deliver the service. You may actually lose the opportunity. You may not be able to send the person on time to the client, or the costs get added on, right? The visa fees go up and the cost has to be borne by the service provider. So given these sorts of things, disciplines on fees and charges, transparency, predictability, these are all relevant principles. So India felt that there is a need along parallel lines to have an agreement in services. Okay, and we've in fact borrowed a lot from the TFA in goods. If you look at the structure of the proposed, the text that is there, it's not yet agreed because there are a lot of debates still going on what's the mandate, etc. It's broadly the same. Many of those items, the clauses in this proposed text, are very similar to that in goods. So we have cross-cutting elements like transparency, disciplining fees and charges, recognition issues, etc., authorizations, but at the same time we also have mode-specific issues like mode 1. Data protection is a major element of that, right? So the trick in services is that how do you separate out entry into the market and yet not undermine the regulatory content making ability of members. This is the difficulty we are facing with this agreement. So for instance, data protection, we are not saying in this agreement that countries do not have the right to devise their own data protection regulations, but it's more about how to try and make it more objectively administered, how to maybe try and come up with some sort of multilateral standards or certification of providers based on certain criteria being met, certain projects having been delivered. So can we arrive at some mechanisms which are less discretionary, less opaque and so on. So it's not about the regulatory content making part, it's really more about the administrative part. It's just like if I take a parallel in goods, yes, of course we negotiate tariffs and so on, but countries will have different tariff levels. So the levels of protection and so on may differ. But when we're talking about trade facilitations, it's about harmonization, it's about classification of goods and so on, and you try to streamline that and make it more efficient, more expeditious and so on. So that's the broad idea of the trade facilitation agreement and services. Of course, our main thrust here is on trying to get at mobility of service providers. I'll be very honest about it. Though strategically, if you look at the text, that portion has been toned down significantly. Actually, in the initial text, it was the bulk of the proposal. But then it started looking like this is a mode 4 proposal and it won't go through. So then we balanced it out between mode 1, mode 4, a little bit on mode 2, on insurance portability and so on. So that there's a little bit for everybody. Everybody feels that all these issues are important and there are cross-cutting issues that are important for all countries. Transparency is important. Publicly available information and providing it on a timely basis is important. This is not India's agenda. Okay?
I think is the draft available for everybody to see? Because
No.
I was just going to, okay, it's not.
But there is a concept note from last year which is available, and then there is an elements paper from later in I think November 2016, which is there. The February 2017 draft text, though I think it's
on the WTO website.
Yeah.
The first two papers. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at that. As Rupa has said, clearly here people have not had a chance to even understand or take a look at TFN services. and you will have to take a look at the positions India is taking by mode. What are we doing to push for movement of professionals? I think an important distinction she made was that the word temporary is what Rupa has used, because India is trying to make a distinction between temporary movement for work versus permanent immigration. She's spoken about cross-border flow, which is very important for our computer and information and business services in this thing. And I think, Rupa, you mentioned that outside of computer and these services, this whole idea that we require a commercial presence in a foreign country, which actually people popularly you might know as FDI, popularly what in your imagination, actually that particular form of delivery of service. So if an Indian company is based in Japan and is offering an insurance service or a technology service, that would be considered as a service export. That's an interesting inclusion as a concept within the trade and services negotiations, because it didn't have to be. But it is an important mode through which services are offered. And so these things make services negotiation particularly different from goods, right? And so as I think most people understand that computer and business services account for most of our services trade. But you think that other sectors also, like logistics, transport, healthcare, are also equally important when you're thinking of trade and services for India, or is it mostly guided by our commerce, by our computer and business services?
It's primarily, if you just look at the statistics, look at some comparative advantage sort of simple calculations, actually it's sad. India is not that competitive in services as we think.
Okay? Even in computers?
No, in IT, BPO, yes we are, though the competitiveness is declining. Okay, that's also there. Professional services, business services, yes we are. Okay, now whether we are not retaining that competitive edge because of barriers in other countries, or whether our skill sets and so on need to be upgraded, standards are coming up, I think there are problems on either side. And there are maybe more competitors coming in as well. But when you talk about are other services important, yes, other services are important. But when I say important, we should not only look at importance from an export point of view. I think when you talk of transport and logistics and things like that, if you look at the balance of payments or of data, we are going to be net importers in those services. These are not going to be net export items. But we need those. And especially if you look at some of the bilateral services data is not good. But whatever is available, if you look at some of the partner countries with which we have signed CICAs and CIPAs, actually these are some areas where we actually can gain from them. Logistics, construction, shipping, Korea for instance. So we need to be strategic and look at imports also as a source of gain. This is where I think the FTA discussion needs to move away from looking at bilateral trade deficits increasing or decreasing as the measure. For instance, and I say this because I completely agree with what he said, that if you look at how trade has changed with our partners, right? Bilateral trade has actually increased. So look at India, Korea. Yes, deficits have grown, but two-way trade has increased, which means we are importing and we are also exporting. Look at the automotive sector. Now, to what extent that is linked to FDI coming in, it's possible. We don't have the data in that manner to link up investment with trade. We should actually going ahead. That is one of the important gauges of whether we are gaining or not. And the other is a lot of intermediate goods imports have increased. Now, there is always the gain for the producer in terms of better quality, variety, sourcing, cost. There could be so many other ways in which we should measure welfare, and we are not capturing that by just looking at a bilateral trade deficit sort of number saying, okay, we are doing badly. But at the same time, I again go back to the point that if you don't generally have manufacturing competitiveness, you're ultimately not going to be as big a gainer as you envisage. And that's what's happening to India. So that's a problem of domestic manufacturing related constraints, many other bottlenecks like infrastructure, logistics, etc. And FTAs cannot address that. FTAs could address it if you could actually attract the investments into those sectors, investments being part of that. Can you strategically do that? Then you will get some of the gains.
I think that was basically pointed at you, Siddharth. What's happening? Why is the industry not utilizing all the good FTAs that India is negotiating at the multilateral level? You use the number 25%. I think that's the highest utilization. I've heard numbers as low as 5% utilization, 4%. We've spent so much energy in government, the think tanks, everyone to negotiate, to think about trade agreements, and then the industry does not even go and use it. What's the problem?